Dislyte Excerpts Radio.
Dislyte Excerpts Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime.
Are you ready? Hold the fate in your hands until the end.
I think at this point, we've gone too long without you guys saying anything specifically about the certain issues that people have brought up. I'm not the first to bring these things up.
I have grown out of love for Dislyte. It's not that game anymore, right?
This content just became extremely pay to win, freaking extremely pay to win, and completely just not fun anymore because you cannot manual stuff, you cannot actually physically control your espers and play strategically, which is what Dislyte was initially supposed to be.
So this is a video that has been sort of in the development for a while. This has been something that I have been wanting to talk about since October. I just felt even throughout the months, this video was always sort of half finished, and even going through the multiple times that I have re-edited parts of this and done many changes, I just felt like it wasn't the right time. And I guess I would say that maybe now feels like the right time. The most recent update and the update we are going into next week, Tuesday, promising to be something a lot better for the game in general. And so I sort of want to let people know some of the things that have happened with this game and sort of just show that what we can steer away from and what we can really move towards from as a whole, as well as some issues that I still have with the game, as well as some things that I still feel like need to be talked about. For the people that do not know what Dislyte is and have found this video, maybe we start off with Dislyte is a game that was released for the phone. It is within the genre of gacha game. Now, what is a gacha game? For these games, you usually get a in-game currency that you can spend real money to actually get more of, and then you can use this currency to get more characters and more units. In a lot of these games, characters are usually separated by how rare they are, and usually the most rarer characters are the better characters in the game. I'm assuming you can start to see where this whole pay to win element can sort of come into this. I think like a lot of people that may have started playing Dislyte or even gachas at first, there's usually a certain thing that really draws you into them. And may that be the character design, maybe where the story is based in time, or just something else in general. And to be fair, the launch for this game was extremely promising. When this game launched, we had YouTubers talking about it, and not just small YouTubers, we had some big YouTubers talking about it. You had people like JonTron. I believe you had it for Game Theory. I believe they even advertised it. And then they also had things like community events. I remember they had this concert for some of the people that provided music for the game. In general, there was a whole lot going on around this game. The thing that really drew me to this game is that the game advertised itself as sort of being a turn-based sort of RPG as well as a rhythm game, so it was very clear, especially from the trailers that were coming out, that music was a very big part of this game. And of course you add the character designs as well that are included into that, and I was like, okay, I'm really liking this so far. For me specifically, one of the only gachas that I was playing at the time, which was Brave Frontier, had recently just gone down. All of the servers were completely shut off and the game is completely dead. So I didn't really have any game to play within this gacha space anymore. And so Dislyte was sort of one of the more promising ones to sort of take that position, especially when you had other games such as Genshin Impact and other gachas based around existing IPs. They just didn't really appeal to me. So now that we've gone over what Dislyte is, maybe let's go into the thing that a lot of people really like about these kind of games. So we have the gacha system, and like I said before, the gacha system refers to, well, the whole system for summoning. What exactly are the units split into, and what the rarities are for getting things like your legendaries, your epics, and your rares. So these are the three types of units that you can get when it comes to what you spin for, but then you also have the element side of things. Dislyte's elements work in a rock paper scissors sort of way where one beats the other. So you have Infernal, you have Wind, and you have Flow. Then you have Shimmer, which hits everything for neutral. Now I don't know how necessarily the game works out what you may get, but generally these are, well, or these were the rates for which you would get certain things. Now Dislyte is a game where there aren't exactly that many units to begin with. Even now, like if we compare from launch and how many like characters have been added, there are still a lot of characters who can't really substitute for what other characters can do. If I'm talking about my previous experience when we had Brave Frontier had so many units to pick from that, let's say you didn't have a certain unit, there was some that you could substitute them with. And of course the big issue with that is that when you have a rarity or something that is so rare and there's a number of characters that sort of align with that, there are characters within that are very strong and characters that have much more niche applications. And so the issue is that the want becomes, I need to get this specific one because then that's going to make doing certain content easier, or it's going to make me have a chance to even take on other players who have that unit. You see, this sort of system connects to what kind of business model is used within this game. As you may have guessed, the more records we have, the more that we can spin, and that means the higher chance we have of getting these units. But what is the best way of getting these gold records?
Money!
You see, this business model is something that is known as freemium, which, putting it very simply, just means that you don't necessarily have to spend any money to play the game. But by not spending money, you end up having a much more limited resource compared to someone who is spending money. If we just look at like the monthly passes and we can see what a free-to-play player gets and what someone who is paying for it can get, I think we can see some differences already. As you can see, just by paying this extra £10, the complete value that you get for your account is completely inflated by a whole lot more, especially when you are in those early stages of the game and you need some of these resources. So that is essentially how they get you for a lot of these sort of packages. So the main gameplay of Dislyte revolves around you making a team of 5 and then rolling out into missions to complete them. The entire battle system works very similar to that of a standard RPG where everyone takes turns based on their speed. For a large majority of your early playtime, a lot of it is going to be just doing the story. Play through a couple of these stages and you get awarded these stars, and now getting these stars will help get you to other pieces of content, such as content that allows you to farm and to increase the levels of your units. The Ritual Miracle is where you farm for your equipment. Currently there are 4 different types of monsters to take on, and you will be awarded different equipment based on which one you do and clear. And then the higher the level, the higher the guarantee that it's going to be a high-end piece of equipment. And I do say that this is a piece of content that you will be doing for the entire run of Dislyte. I actually made this little graph here. So we have early game, mid game, and late game. And so far we have story mode, which I'd say takes us up to the mid game because we have difficulties where, you know, you start off at easy, you go normal, then you go to purgatory, and then hell mode. Ritual Miracle, on the other hand, is something you have to keep doing to constantly just keep getting new gear and better gear. All in all, it's pretty expensive for the gold that you do get in the game. I would say for the most part, if you want to get a good piece of gear when you're still starting out, that's all your money. That is all of it gone. What that also means, there'll be no more upgrading, there'll be no more leveling for you. You just have to then start farming gold after that. And I guess it's because of that I would say the first, like the early game and the mid game, like that's where there is the most interaction because you're doing something to do something. But this chart only accounts for the content that is available now. If I were to remove some of the stuff that wasn't here at launch, this is what it would look like. And as you can see, not a whole lot happening here. A big issue with this sort of gameplay loop is that, well, it's not really intuitive, nor does it really make you do anything all that different. It sort of relies on having events and new stuff come out so that something is actually changing with the experience. That is the most frustrating thing as well. We are going into almost year 3, and you know, our gameplay loop has been the same the whole time. I would say there are a number of players that are in a similar situation to me, where we are in the end game, but when it comes to things like ranking and it comes to sort of the leaderboards, which you do get rewards for depending on how high you are, is that while we aren't hitting, say, like the top 10s or like the top 5%, a big issue is that when we're not hitting that, it's like, so what am I playing this for? Because I'm not being rewarded. I'm just here. Another thing that really irks me as well with this game is that for a lot of endgame players, a lot of content for us is not difficult. So when they do bring out something, it's generally just not that challenging. Or the process is so tedious in order to get our reward that a lot of people don't even try to do it. My big issue with the dev team is that their idea of sort of inflating the difficulty rather than coming up with more intricate mechanics for certain things, it's just to take the levels of the enemies and just say. And then we have the events, which essentially is the only real reason to be excited for any new patches that are coming out. Like, seriously, the events really are the only things that keep, I think, a lot of people coming back to Dislyte, and the interesting designs of characters coming out. Dislyte in its first year was kind of a weird thing to go through. There were many patches where a lot of new characters were being added, but there were also a lot of issues that were coming during this first year as well that a lot of players were really pushing back against as well. Especially after the main global launch, there were some issues that players were having regarding the future of the patches, as well as the health of the game. As you can see, I've labelled out these patches in terms of what were good patches and what were bad patches. And what I mean by this is mainly in terms of the content that was introduced. Now, if a character was just added, I don't really see that as much of a plus, because that in these sort of games, that's just guaranteed to happen. But if anything else, it's just like also taking in sometimes the player experience as well during this by looking at some of the Dislyte content creators during this time. So it's the big launch, and to be fair, not a whole lot was really known by the people playing as soon as they got in there. A lot of the information that we got really came from the people who were doing the beta testing and really in there from the beginning of the game. Then came patch 3.01, where we got the new 5-star Ole, but this patch also introduced a certain problem as well. You see, we hadn't really had a new unit, and so there was no direct guarantee of getting Ole, especially since he was kind of popular because he was in the base story. So at first, what they decided to do is they made it so that you had a higher chance of summoning Ole when you did get a legendary. The next two patches were pretty uneventful, and they actually introduced this thing during Ahmed's patch where similar to Ole's, your chance of summoning Ahmed was increased, but there was also this thing where if you had spent 450 summons, it was guaranteed that you would get Ahmed. And the thing about 450 records is that this was just not feasible in general. Do you know how much that is? Why don't we work that out? But this was essentially the only way that you could guarantee yourself getting these units. Not to mention, during this patch we actually got a new piece of content called the Desolate Lands, but all it really was just min-maxing for your equipment and then just making sure it was you trying to make it the best piece of equipment it could be. The next few after that really tried to focus on fixing some quality of life things that some players were having issues with the games, or just things that were sort of annoying players in general that people were complaining about. During 3.1, that showed off a potential future design for a character, and so this was really making the rounds and everyone was really asking around for who this character was. Well, actually it was pretty obvious, but everyone just wanted this character to be immediate. They wanted this character as soon as they saw him. And well, the people did not have to wait long, let me tell you. Just a patch after that, we got Gaius. And Gaius was a really big turn in general because he was really popular, like just from the design alone. During this time, we actually got another way of getting the event Esper, and this was through something called SSM. I'm just gonna say, as soon as they sort of everything for this system came out, everyone hated it. So the thing is, you needed 50 SSM to spin, and then after 80 spins, you had a 50% chance of actually getting the event Esper, or a 50% chance of getting 4 other Espers that were also in the pool. Now, a big issue for this is that SSM was not plentiful. In a month, I think it was calculated that you could get 1,500, which is 30 spins. Because let's say if you did buy 80 of these super sensors just to have them and just to know that you could get the event Esper at any time, you still only have a 50% chance of getting it. And that's for if it's guaranteed. Of course, sometimes you may get it earlier, but the chance of you getting earlier is not very high. And what this generally means in the long run is, let's say if you were super unlucky, this means that for 2 patches, that would be the only time where you would have the event Esper for like as soon as they come out. That's 2 times. 2 patches out of the 12 of the year. Not to mention, during this, another change that we got was actually to the resonance system. Now, this is something that I haven't gone over already, but generally, when you get a legendary Esper, and let's say you get them again, you want a reason to sort of keep spinning. And before this patch, the only thing you really got was the chance to increase their base stats. During this patch, however, this made it so that you actually got points that you could put into your character, and then you had this whole branch of tree of like talents and things that would basically become a part of that character's kit. Other than this change, a lot of the changes coming up really just sort of just fixing the way that the game was, just giving the players a few more features to really mess around with. One thing that's really funny about me looking back on these 4 different patches is that, and probably the biggest reason why I've sort of pitched them all together, is that at the time, these felt like really big updates. But when I look through like all the things that were sort of added, some things that were slightly changed, I just see that it was more of like, you know, when you're playing the game and you're like, okay, finally we're getting an update, so maybe we'll get something different. It was essentially that. The only real big thing that really happened was that we actually got the chance to vote for what Espers we wanted to come out next, but it was just a lot of nothing for a while. And as you can guess, during this time, a lot of people were not happy. A lot of content creators around this time were getting a little bit frustrated because things weren't happening. And not to mention, we had a rough idea that we had an update coming along that would probably be the biggest changes we've had so far, just because there has been a lot of nothing. But during this time, there was no communication from the Dislyte devs at all. And so even people who were sort of close to the development team, they just weren't getting anything. And it was really frustrating for the players because we were just like, so what are we even doing? And just as many of the players had anticipated, we did indeed get a really large update with 3.1.7 with the Yuntron event, where a whole bunch of things such as the leveling system, the way that you upgraded certain characters, it was really clunky and really slow before, but it was really improved to be a little bit better this time. And we also had the resonant change to what it is nowadays, in which I can say it was definitely a much bigger and better change. This event was really one of those where I don't think anyone was really upset about the changes that were coming in. A whole bunch of characters got buffed. Everyone just sort of got resources. No matter how long they had been playing, it just felt like everyone had more resources to do things with, to where even I had a mass summoning video out when it was the event. One change that they made as well that ended up just changing the game forever for the better was the introduction of the wish stones. We were saying goodbye to SSM, which made it a lot easier for people to just say, I want that unit, I have the resources to get it, so I'm just going to get it. I'd say the next 4 patches really focused on having more of a quality of life change sort of thing happening, where they were focusing on just making the game a little bit better. And Ethan's event was pretty big as well, because that is when we had gotten the Japanese and Korean servers added to the game, And because a lot of people were complaining about content and just the lack of it, they even added an extra difficulty made for more endgame players for the story mode. Generally, looking at just the first year of Dislyte and what it was and how it was sort of panning out to be, was not leaving a really good taste in people's mouths, especially considering it had started off so strong and a main selling point of everything had just been how good everything looked. When all of that was slowly fading away, we were really worried when it came to year 2, especially as we was coming up to the 1 year anniversary. Moving up to the 1 year anniversary, we actually ended up getting a devlog sort of update from the developers talking about possible espers that were coming and just showing off a bunch of the designs that they had in the back. And one thing as well is that you may notice that there's a lot of green in this first quarter, I'd say half, and that's because we had this new piece of content that was slowly building on top of itself with each update, and that is what sort of made it interesting. It gave us another piece of content to really look out for. You know, if we refer back to my chart that I made, that's just an extra piece of that. I truly think year 2 was the most volatile, mainly because we had such a huge high and then just throughout the year just slowly dropping down. I would say probably the most notable thing when it came to the first update was that we had one of the biggest collaborations that they had in general, and that was with the really big YouTuber Markiplier, where he was a skin for Disc Boom in the hub world. This was pretty big for the time because everyone was just like, oh, we haven't had anything to do with anyone big in like YouTube for quite a while now. And not to mention, this is probably the most marketed that I would say Dislyte had sort of been. They really jumped on like the arcane bandwagon by having a very like Jinx and Vi sort of relationship between two characters, and they really played that up. And I think that did well in their favors. I think a lot of people who are like sort of newer to Dislyte, this is probably how they sort of got into it, or this is where they sort of found it, was usually from this event. And so that was something that I think was pretty interesting. One piece of advice that the players always gave to the developers of Dislyte was that the story and the world building felt extremely weak, and so it very much seemed like that is something that they meant to improve on. And I would say that they really focus on sort of trying to add more story, add more depth to a lot of these characters and really build a bit of a universe around it. And as I was saying before, we had a piece of content called the Celestial Anomaly, which was essentially like a tower based thing that we would get rewards and get a free Esper. And we thought that was going to stay around, but that was not the case. And so when that disappeared and 3.3 sort of was the update, a lot more cracks were really starting to show within the Dislyte team and the just Dislyte game in general. I would say around this point is where things started to get really rough in general. It was clear that they wanted to still have a focus on story-based content, but also while doing this they made questionable game decisions. For example, in 3.3.3 we had something called the Divinate system that was introduced to the game, and this was essentially another gacha where you get these little cards, and then these, as it was advertised to us, it was a new way to really play with a character. And so they were really selling it as like, oh, this is something that might be as impactful as Divinates. And a lot of people were really like theory crafting with it of like, okay, maybe you'll be able to turn like a damage dealer into like a healer, because they were really advertising it as, oh, you're going to be able to change these units. And when I tell you that when we got to take a look at some of the Divinates that were available for characters, it was questionable. I would say even now, this update was probably one of the worst, because it was constantly just like content creators being like, please don't release this, it's not ready, it's just not in a state where it's like every character has something. A lot of questionable decisions during this point were just being made, and it wasn't making any sense. And especially during this time, because content creators felt like they weren't even being listened to, a lot of them were starting to just slowly leave, with some of the bigger ones just completely just being like, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore. And during this time as well, there was actually a lot of rumors going around regarding the state of Dislyte and the state of the main company in charge of Dislyte. it was really going around the community that like Dislyte was dying, it wasn't getting a lot of money. The issue with this is that not a lot of people really took it seriously at first, but then there was a post that really made the Dislyte community kind of blow up, which no one was happy about this. And they introduced this thing, or they asked this question on their Discord, which said, how would you guys feel if we took like existing character designs or existing characters and then just changed their kits and released them as new espers? And now, because of what they had said here, a lot of people were immediately in that mindset of, oh, it's over, the game is dying. Because as a developer where you're releasing new characters and you're releasing, you know, you have so much to really take from. When you say, should we use an existing design and just change the kit and make it a new god, how is the community supposed to react to that? And slowly more and more people were just like, this game's over, there's nothing like. And so I think this is where a lot of people were really jumping ship, especially because you had other games like Reverse 99 to come out as well. And then these next couple of updates was when it was looking bad, but it was also looking up at the same time. We had something added, which was the Materia Research Lab, which was this thing that essentially rewarded you for being more of a long-time player, and as long as you had a lot of like resources when it came to your characters and you had built them up, you'd get rewards for that. But then there's this other issue of some of the best perks that you could get from this were locked behind you owning some of the rarest characters in the game. And a bunch of these updates were just making this like slowly look like it was going even more in a downward spiral. The only thing that I would say we really did get, when a new character did come out, they had a little bit more characterization and the story around them was a lot more well thought out. And then I would say once we sort of really started to hit the sort of year 3 mark of Dislyte, kind of, well, it's not technically year 3 of like from global launch, but you know what I mean, it's 2024. January's patch was kind of big because the developers finally came out and they were like, okay, we are aware that we was giving you really bad updates and that we weren't really giving you anything to do, and the reason for that is because we was working on the Chinese server. And so that was something where it was like, okay, at least finally the devs are saying something. And then they showed off the January patch and it was looking quite eventful. We were getting events that would slowly give us free characters and even a free shimmer. Overall, there was just a lot of changes here where it's like, okay, if we keep doing things like this, we're gonna continuously like keep helping out our free-to-play audience. And that sort of leaves us with where we are now with the patch coming up from Wednesday or Tuesday, the Uran event, where the Celestial Anomaly will make its return. I don't know. I'm hoping that Dislyte from this point onwards really starts to take note of its free-to-play audience and does more things that keep people playing rather than things that force people to just pay their way through things. Because essentially the more people playing your game, the more people that will be spending anyways. And you know what, I need to interject with something because something came out very recently that did not make me happy. And just like the devs do this thing where just where things are looking good, things are looking great, and things just seem like they're gonna go so well, they then do something which is like, why would you do that? And so what they've decided to do with their most recent patch, which has not come out but the patch notes are out, is that they're slowly locking away certain PvP game modes and making it so that you need to reach a certain score or a certain level in another game mode in order to even partake in like the new one or the new version of the new one or the new version of that. And this is just not smart. This is, even for me as someone who is considered to be in this top 7%, they want people to hit this mark, and if I was struggling doing that and I'm the 7%, what is the other 93% going to be doing? And then that means I'm gonna only be fighting against the top like 6-7%. I can't compete with that because a lot of that is just based on, well, do you have these characters? If not, then you're sort of out of luck. There's not much that you can really do with that. And so this is just one of those where it's like, as soon as we have something good, the devs just immediately come out and ruin it with some bullshit. But now that I've had the opportunity to talk about the patch and the health of the game, how that's been going, let me talk about the metas that we've had regarding PvP. And like I said, with patch 3.0, it was essentially just a global launch and everyone was just finding out who was good at what they did. Personally, I think the first patch had the best kind of versatility we've ever had regarding the meta at all. Regarding bruiser and control meta, the best and the strongest teams were ones that ran like 3 tanks or 2 tanks, 2 healers, and then 1 main damage dealer. And the really good thing about this as well is that because at this point in time, we didn't have any super high damage dealers, and a lot of the ones that were like really high damage dealers were actually 3-star units. So, and for a game that really promoted itself on every character being like, could be used, every character had purpose, and you could use any character that you wanted. For the time, this was almost one of the most perfect metas. Then I would say the next meta that really defined itself as a meta was tank meta. As we know already, having control and being tanky was something that was already really prioritized from the beginning. And I would say with tanky units, and I'd say with Ollie's release and Ahmed's release, who were great additions to not only tanks, but especially with Ahmed having brilliant synergy
With a certain tank that ended up pushing him way higher in the tier list.
Then I'd say we actually start to have some units that introduce higher damage into the game. With the release of units like Ophelia, ChangoW, Gaius, Ashley, Abigail, and Brewster, we were having units that essentially the entire strategy was to be fast, boost everyone else's speed on your team, boost their AP, and make sure you can kill the enemy in 1 turn or 2. With units like Dahlia and Cleva being really good units to help out Ophelia, who was essentially the biggest tank killer at the time, it essentially made it that going full damage and going full speed was just the best way to go. And I think for this whole, like, these 6 patches, you couldn't go anywhere without seeing Dahlia, Clara, Ashley, Gaius. Like, that was always the key thing. Those were the key characters each time. Then I'd say that when the patch, which was changing up the resonances and everything, and we had the addition of wish stones, we weren't actually sure what the meta was looking like. With the new resonance system, legendaries when fully resonated, had a 35% increase in all their stats, as well as some extra bells and whistles. So I would say a lot of people were saying that tanks were getting even stronger, but I also think Cleve also got just as strong. So I would say that essentially things were sort of in the middle. I feel like not NA, but most comps around this time could work. Nushi was a menace. Quite frankly, anyone who had her had essentially won the game. It was really tricky because Nushi was one of those characters who only one other character did something similar. Nushi was able to increase the cooldown of most people on the enemy team, and the worst thing is that you couldn't really defend yourself against it. If she used it, she also had the chance of stripping any buffs that you had as well. This includes buffs that may have protected you from any of her statuses that she could inflict as well, which generally just wasn't going to last. If you got into a thing where both players had her, it was all speed. Everything was speed. Nushi essentially made a lot of the units that were really popular useless if she got to move. And then you mix this with 2 characters who probably had some of the best R2 resonances, where Ethan was one of the best supports because not only does he add damage mitigation, he also increases your team speed by 20 by just existing. And in a meta where speed is really important, you can imagine how fair and balanced that felt. And then you had KaiusJai, who...
Up. Alright, we lose a bit of HP here, very nice. Changti is actually gonna swap. Boom! What the freaking hell, dude?
And then we got a meta based around just one character, really. This character had been recently buffed for this patch, and the buff was so excessive, it was so crazy. that immediately pushed this character from who was essentially one of the worst damage dealers in the game from the beginning, and it immediately pushed him to probably the best, and I would say probably still one of the best from this point on.
Okay, so let's go ahead and use the S3 here. So that hit for like 99k.
To where they then had to release like an emergency hotfix to where they made him slightly worse. But like I said before, he's still one of the best damage dealers and still one of the best tank killers. Not to mention, he also stops you from reviving your units. So, I mean, what doesn't he have? What would you suggest be the option to destroy speed meta? Because if you said introduce a unit who starts off with 30 extra speed as soon as the game starts, you win nothing, but congratulations for guessing. Introducing Toland, and he's one of the best controllers, and he's really rare. So with Ethan giving you a plus 20 and then Toland having a plus 30 naturally, essentially getting hit by his abilities meant that that unit did not exist. Then we have Anna, and Anna is a huge problem for the game even now, I believe. Anna is a PvP monster, not even just PvP, just combat in general. I was really excited for this character when she was in the Nora event trailer because I thought her design looked really cool. But slowly, more and more as she's existed within the game, I cannot stand seeing this character. I hate her so much. She essentially just wins most PvP games for you by existing. And I know that I keep saying that a lot of units keep doing things by existing, but just take a look at what an Anna versus Anna matchup looks like. And yes, it was slowly getting faster and faster. She has been nerfed slightly, but it's not to an effect where I really think it makes her that much weaker. And then you also have Mavis, who was introduced, who essentially did massive things for bruiser characters, so characters who like to be tanky and do damage. Her Graveless effect essentially meant that characters didn't exactly die, but when she used her third ability, they would revive, or when she died, they would be revived. And then I think they had 2 actions to take, which when you have Anna on your side and she isn't necessarily dead, then we have a problem. I would say the worst part of Dislyte, just looking at these metas as a whole, is that we've slowly pushed ourselves away from making every unit available as to what, you know, they used to advertise, but also every single meta has been determined by a Shimmer character, who we've already gone over have some of the lowest rates for even attaining. Quite frankly, this game has really come across and given its own player base the status of you gotta play to win or you're just not gonna be able to compete. And this isn't saying that you can't do well in PvP. I mean, I don't own most of these espers, but either way, you're gonna struggle. Then we have the additions of skins, and here's the thing, we had our first skin during the Ollie update, and when we looked at the design of it regarding the artwork, we was like, okay, this looks nice. And then it came out and we saw we had to spend £20. Look at the model looked so rough compared to the artwork. And here's the thing, £20, compare that to like a £20 skin from like League of Legends. I understand that League has been doing skins for longer, but you really got to weigh your options here. We are in a recession. This is we are in a cost of living situation. And you're telling me that I'm going to choose to pick this over that? No way. And then later on, I decided to change it to vouchers. And they need to up the amount of vouchers that people get because it's not great. And like I said before, the rewards are for the people at the top, not so much for the people within that middle to early section. But I do have a really big bone to pick with the Dislyte devs, and that is regarding the more rarer skins. And so these skins are essentially ones that you can only get through this event called Warm Up Match, Warm-up match is a PvP game mode where instead of 5v5 it is 4v4 because you get to ban one of their espers away. But you have to get so high, you pretty much like have to climb the ranks of it, and you have to essentially get like almost the last one to even get the skin. The fact that you have to grind so hard for it has turned so many people away, and I wish that they would release the percentages of the people who have the skins. Because I understand you want to make something that's exclusive, but you also need to make something where it's like, it's feasible for me to get. The rank that I like, the last one that I tried to do for, I forgot what character's skin it was, but I'll put it up on the screen. I literally had to wait till the last 20 minutes of the event to get it, because that is when people would rush and be like, oh, I've only got 20 minutes left. Because essentially, like I said with my meta section, if you don't have the shimmers or you don't have like the really meta defining espers, what are you gonna do? Personally, I wish that they would just bring that reward tier down a little bit, maybe have it to like platinum, have it come to diamond, just something to make it a little bit more accessible for people, please. And that's all I got to say on skins. It's incredibly overpriced for what it is usually a lot of the time, and it's usually for characters that aren't even relevant to the meta anymore. So there it is, see ya. They have given skins away for example, the Valentine's Day ones, which were always good. They were always really good. But I just wish they either decided to give it away for free or just create content that is like kind of grindy so that you can sort of save up for it. Now, the reason why I sort of wanted to bring this up is because of something that the YouTuber Zox had said regarding like the marketing campaign of rival like gacha games, sort of like Raid and all that. Compared to something like Raid, Dislyte's marketing is nowhere near as obnoxious and overbearing as Raid's is, and I don't really know what the issue is, but Lilith Games, the parent company in control of like a lot of this, have some of the worst ads that I've ever had when it comes for Dislyte. And like, for what this game is, we don't need some of these like, whoa, you don't have 6 million power. Just look at this.
Welcome, Dislyte players.
It's an honor to be invited. It's not every day you see a 4-star Yanlu Wang.
Sorry, sir. We just raised the entry requirement to 5-star espers.
What?
How about me? 5-star Odin, Sif, and Ra? You're the VVIP we invited today.
How did you do that?
I chose Artemis as my main offensive esper at the beginning of the game. As a powerful AoE DPS, she's capable of multi-stage attacks and deals an explosive amount of damage. She's also capable of healing. By relying on her, I easily beat the earlier levels. Download now and get 10 free summons.
The moonlight will pierce the darkness.
Nini is such a noob. All she has are 3-star espers.
She does not belong here. Let's get her out of our squad.
A few moments later.
Hey, Nini.
Like, why are we dressed like this? What does this have to do with anything? What is happening? Oh, I can't. Just keep this going.
Sorry, we forgot to tell you you're not part of our squad.
I also forgot to tell you that I now have a 5-star now.
It's green screened on. It's green screened on. On that note, I think I'm gonna end it here. I don't know if any of this was really helpful for anyone, but I made this anyway. I just want everyone to, I don't hate Dislyte, I just hate the decisions that they make regarding the game a lot of the time. I do feel like they can make a change and make it better, but as you saw in the timeline and how the life of the game has gone so far, looking at it right now, I don't know if Dislyte's gonna last that long, and who knows what's gonna happen. And for anyone who says, oh, you're late with the patch, the new patch already came out. Actually, Celestial normally doesn't unlock until a few hours, so it technically is still not the new patch yet. So I still have time. And with that, I'm out of here. This entire project was so huge. So if anyone wants to give me some money towards my birthday, coming up so I can get a new hard drive, feel free to do so. I'm out, everyone.